Now. All right. So once again, thank you all. This is the fourth Coyuntura Política. We've done 4 sessions. This is the last session that we're doing before our in-person gathering in Puerto Rico in a few weeks. This session's just to give folks a little background and reminder. We wanted to pull together respected organizers, movers and shakers, rebeldes, all those beautiful terms. We wanted to engage people on the question of political analysis and movement strategy. The reason is that mi gente just turned 5 years old. And, the first 5 years, I think we started with a particular set of overarching goals and interventions we were trying to make. But there was very much, I think there was fundamental things we were trying to do, but very much, we were experimenting and in many ways, really responsive to the moments. And so now as we look forward to the next 5 years, I think we want to build on that ability to respond rapidly, to create opportunities out of crisis, but also to be first responders in moments of crisis, and to start having some, alongside that track that we built, some more developmental goals and a strategy of where we're trying to build, how we're trying to build, and what we're trying to win. And so this is why these conversations have been so critical, because we're trying to draw on people that we work with, people that we admire, people that we respect, to get a perspective about this time. And, this part, these conversations, the readings, and just for us to all take time to reflect is part of, for us, assessment. And, we see assessment as something so critical for us as organizers, because, in a very basic, fundamental way, the job of the organizer is to make the impossible seem possible. And to do that, we have to be grounded in reality. We have to understand the world as it is now. We have to understand the material conditions. We have to understand our adversaries, and we have to understand the potential power, and the way that ordinary people can become protagonists, who are not just people that things happen to, but people who make history. And so, you all will be hearing about these folks in a few minutes, but I just want to personally thank you so much for taking the time. I've met with all of you, and I'm just really excited for this conversation. Before I pass it to Stephanie and Rafael for the introductions, I just wanted to take a minute. I wanted to take a minute here to pause and to give recognition to and to recognize the passing of Elizabeth Petita Martinez. Elizabeth, to me, is a person who personified this idea that I feel like I've really gravitated to over the years, of making a play wherever the hell you are. From her days in SNCC to her role of the creation of El Grito del Norte community newspaper in Mexico, she sought ways for us, in addition to all that, she sought ways for us to remember. A lot of times in Mi Gente, we talk about the things we have to unlearn and the things we have to remember. And she did this in her production and her writing of books like the 500 years of Chicano history and pictures, 500 years of Chicano women's history. She was an internationalist. She was intersectional before that word was a buzzword. She was a trailblazer who leaves us with another example and another time where we get to see someone who looks like us, who we recognize, who stood on the right side of history and worked hard to bend the long arc of history towards justice. So please join me in taking a moment of silence honoring Petita. Thank you. So with that, I will pass it to Stephanie and Rafael. I'll let you all rock, paper, scissors. Que quiere empezar. They'll be introducing our guests this evening. and then we'll kick it off.
I'll jump in since I'm off mute and I feel like, dope, awesome. What's up, mi gente? I am like so excited to see you guys. I'm also freaking excited to see most of you next week. Getting all ready and getting Kamati ready, not to go with me, but to stay here. So yes, that is a challenge. Anyways, I'm really excited to introduce someone I deeply admire and has been instrumental in my own political consciousness and just roll in this movement, which is Edie's. And because I fangirl Edie's, I have 2 books with me today of hers. And so I'm going to be reading from one of her books, her biography for you all. Some of this you guys might know, but if not, bear with me. So Edie's is the founder and executive director and editor of Red Sugarcane Press. She is a lifelong activist and educator dedicated to human rights and the decolonization of Puerto Rico. Her community activism and love of history and storytelling led her to media production, publishing, and writing. Edith is the author of Through the Eyes of Rebel Women, The Young Lords, 1969 through 1976, which is the first account of women's experiences in the organization, and it was published in 2016. It is a really dope book, and I really hope you guys check it out if you haven't already. Her award-winning documentary, Pa'lante Siempre Pa'lante, The Young Lords, premiered on national public television in 1996 and continues to introduce audiences to the social justice movements of Boricuas in the United States during the 1960s and 1970s. Iris was a leading member of the Young Lords Party, co-founder of its affiliated women's union, and co-leader of the Philadelphia chapter of the Puerto Rican Revolutionary Workers Organization. Her work and writings about this period have been widely anthologized and appear in a number of publications, including dozens of college readers. Edith is a native New Yorker and holds a JD from New York University School of Law. And she has so many accolades. I can't even go through all of them, but I will say Edith is a consistent thought thinker with mi gente. She was in one of our escuelitas in New York City a couple of years ago, just an incredible elder in our movement, and also an inspiration to me and so many others who are just trying to figure this shit out. So Edith, thank you so much for being here with us, and I'll pass it to Rafa.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm also very excited to introduce both Lorena and Guillermo. I actually started my political work. I got to know them at a very young age. I believe I was 19, maybe 20. I don't remember. It's been a while. And, we were part of National Commission for Democracy in Mexico, which was a support for the Zapatistas here in the US. And it was work that I hold very dear. And it was right at the beginning of, and, I came into this a little later. I know both Guillermo and Lorena were there already when I arrived, and really leading the work to try to disseminate information and to support and defend indigenous struggle in Mexico. And along with Cecilia, who was significant, who was the representative for them here. And so I got to meet them really early on in my political formation, and it was the most formidable, I think, experience. And they are deep comrades that I love and that I consistently try to just talk to, learn from, because I think they're doing, in addition to the work we did historically, just to intro, I know, Guillermo has been organizing in Texas and in the South, and I learned what it meant to be Mexicano in Texas versus California through some of the conversations through Guillermo, and just, the kind of repression that what we face everywhere, but in Texas, it had a very particular flavor. And it was something that, especially when you look at in the 60s, and I've learned both a lot from the work, you did in the Brown Berets, but also helping to found, along with Cecilia and otros compañeros, the Mujer Obrera, and the work to build this long-term base of resistance. And, Lorena, who we both come from California and is dedicated and moved to make sure to build and continue the legacy of that work. And really just one of the most impressive things I've ever seen, where we have every day, folks from our communities, mujeres, actually building a center, taking on land, building a restaurant, building infrastructure, and doing it in a very political way, an explicit way of building space and resisting, neoliberalism, resisting the onslaught in our communities, and that they've been both at it for since I've met them. And so just to have them here to be able to kind of share their experiences, I can't be more excited. I've always wanted us to, build more work as Mi Gente with the work that they do. And I'm excited that this is one of the ongoing conversations, and excited to have them both here.
Thank you. Let's jump in. I'll let y'all give your opening salvo in a second here. But just to kick off with the question, y lo de ahí will go. So, and I'm gonna tend to say Latinx, I'll say Latino, I'll say Latina, but use whatever term you use in your work and how you talk about it. I think in this particular session, I think the question of regionalism and like vernacular is actually gonna be like more disparate. And so this actually is the conversation to talk about one of the things I think talking about the Latino community and see. So just to say that on the front end, those que go at it as you will. So based on your experience and worldview, what does a vibrant and powerful organization, I mean in the broad sense, in the Latinx community look like in these times? And what do you think is required to build it? So we can start off with Iris and then go to either Guillermo or Lorena.
Well, good evening, everybody. Primeramente, what I want to say is that it's a great honor to be here. I had the opportunity to meet some of Mi Gente folks in New York City and fell in love with the people and the work that you're doing. And so when I was invited to participate, it was a no-brainer for me to join you, to learn from you, and to share whatever experience I can bring to you. Something that wasn't in my bio that I think will help me answer this question is that I started out as a tenant organizer at a very young age. I subsequently became a student organizer at a time when Puerto Ricans were first entering the university in historic numbers. Subsequently, I became a community organizer with the Young Lords. I did some worker organizing in hospitals and factories in Philadelphia. I returned to New York, was involved with decolonization issues for Puerto Rico and political prisoners, and began working with young people, and they steered me in the road of filmmaking and book publishing and classes with young people. So in answering this question, I felt a little inadequate in the sense that I don't have all the depth of information about Mi Gente and what you all are doing. And I felt I had more questions than didn't want to take up the time with that. So I wanted, based on my experiences, I wanted to kind of give you a list of about 10 things that I feel are critical in the organizations that I have participated that have been vibrant and powerful and have moved community. And so I'm going to give you this, it's kind of a list of things or lessons, if I could say. The first thing is that an organization is its people. So I always start from the people. You know, who are your people? And in our case, if we're talking about a Latinx organization, it has to be working class people, because that's the majority of our folks. And so, you know, this is already your direction. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I do want to emphasize that aspect, because there is such a great need for the work of Mi Gente. There's a lot of distraction and right at this moment that could lead us in other directions. And we have to stay very true to that mission, which is where I believe we belong. Um, the second thing for me that is very, very important is, what do we believe? What do we stand for? You know, what do we say? What do we say to the people? You know, what do people, why are people going to want to organize with us? Why are people going to believe in making a movement? What is going to motivate people? So I want to give an example of something that's kind of clear, that communicates in a direct way to people about what our struggles are, and that includes many different ideas, because you know there's a lot of academia that has spilled into our movements, as was one of the sessions was saying, so that people don't even know what we're talking about. Hell, I don't know what sometimes they're talking about, and I have several degrees and still I don't understand. I have to ask them what they mean. But here's one that I think, to me, goes to the heart of things. It says, we want liberation, clothing, free food, education, healthcare, transportation, full employment, and peace. We want a society where the needs of the people come first, and where we give aid and solidarity to the people of the world, not oppression and racism. The reason that I like this is because it goes to the immediate needs of people. It also goes to our aspirations for liberation, and it also connects us with the world. And I think that one of the important things that the Latinx or community can contribute is a sense of internationalism and solidarity with people around the world, because our people come from around the world, in particular Latin America and the Caribbean. And so not to address what our people already know is to truncate, you know, our experience. So I give you that as an example, not as, you know, the model, but as an example. The third thing is that our organizations have to convey to the people that we are part of a long historic struggle, and that our fight consists of short-term victories and setbacks as we battle toward a new society and a new direction. And the reason that I say that is because oftentimes I find that people become disillusioned if they don't gain the wage increase that they were seeking, or the politician they wanted elected, and they start to fall off. And you asked at the beginning the question of what makes a long distance runner. And I think that this goes to the heart of that, you know, that our struggle is long, and that we have a role to play during our lifetimes. And maybe it's also a reflection that I'm getting older, that we have a role to play within our lifetime, and that we will have victories and we will have setbacks, and that we seek to have more victories than setbacks. And then this brings me to the point that I think we need to do political education with our communities and with our membership. And it's one of the things that I've noticed in the last 20, 30 years that has fallen off. Sometimes young people will say to me, oh, we have an annual meeting where we do a lot of political education. No, I'm talking about consistent political education. Back in the day, we did political education every week, and we did with the community, and there was no dumbing down for the community. We raised the same issues that we raised because we were the community. So, you know, I think that that's important for us to be educating ourselves and be educating our community. Otherwise, we get it either into reformist struggles or into economic struggles without understanding the political complexities that you all are dealing with much more so, I think, than we did. As organizers today, we must be in workplaces, in communities, and engage with issues that our people care about, like immigration and economic justice. There are other issues, but I'm saying that these are pivotal issues for the Latinx community. And I'm not saying we need to be in all these places at all the same time, because that would be an impossibility, but that we have to have a presence in each of those sectors or whatever, because they will give us an understanding, and we will be able to provide guidance and organize with people in different sectors and have a voice. And we're learning, and there's a dialectical relationship. One of the things that we need, because we can't be in all places, is we need entry points for people to participate. Oftentimes our people want to get involved, but how do they get involved? One of the strategies that did work for us, and that I have, we have used a number of times, I have used in my lifetime, is to have, political education classes that anybody can come, right? And it gives an opportunity for people to meet, to exchange with each other, and they don't have to be affiliated to any organization there, because we're building a movement. We're not just building an organization. So people can meet with each other. People can say, oh, well, I know of this, you can get involved in this, or if not, just to come and learn. You never know where this person that comes, each one of our people is precious, and will go somewhere, we'll do something. And so it's our responsibility to provide entry points, for people. Can be simple things, so that we're not creating another layer to our organization unnecessarily, because you already have a lot to do. The other thing is that a powerful Latinx organization today must be engaged in multiracial political work with allies. You must. There is no way that we cannot be. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to create a whole section, a sector, but it has to be part of our fabric, like having the morning coffee. If we're going on a demonstration, or if we're involved in a petition, that we say, oh, who can sign on to this, or who can join us at the rally, or who can, it has to be just part of our DNA, right? It's not like a thing that, oh, this thing we have to do, oh, we forgot to do it. No, it has to be part of our DNA. These are our allies, these are our people, particularly African Americans, people of color, and working class communities. Latinx, yeah.
You're at about 5. So I want to see if we can jump to either Lorena or Guillermo, because
Okay.
you are giving a master class here. I'm
sorry.
like, I don't know. No, I'm saying it as a good thing. You should see on the chat, people are like popcorning, and I'm like taking copious notes.
Well,
Let me
I
see if
have
we
just
can.
a couple of things I can consolidate them really without giving, I'll just go through quickly so that we can.
You want to do that, or do you want me to go to them and then come back to you?
I would do it very quickly.
Vale, pues.
I think we have other conversations. I'm sorry that I took up so much time. I got.
No.
All right.
No,
Well, the
no es
next
así.
one, very simply, we must fight for the liberation of women. It has to be front and center, and against gender violence. Those have to be. We have to develop master communications tools online, podcast, print, all the stuff that you all know. But we got to develop spokespeople. We have to employ multiple strategies and tactics. We must include children in our activities. We must remember Children are part of our struggle. Last but not least, we have to bring joy to the movement, music, culture, not only to uplift our own spirits, but to spread the message. So those are my 10 points. Thank you. Thank you. I apologize for getting overboard.
No te preocupes, no, si supieras aquí este grupito que está, no.
Gracias.
You're good. Estás en casa. Se lo paso, whoever wants to go next, Lorena or Guillermo.
I can go next. Pues, thank you for inviting us here to speak. I'm Lorena Andrade, and I'm with La Mujer Obrera in El Paso, Texas. For us, a vibrant community organization or community, I think we've always been taught to have a balance of protecting against what's coming at us and then building the alternative with our own creativity. So it's always doing those two things. Y como decía la compañera, con el estudio, with the study, with the analysis, all of these things. And so it's always defending. And I think one of the most important, especially for our community, is, what if we just choose to stay here, right? What if we choose to stay in this place and strengthen and heal our relationships with each other, our community, and with the earth here? And so the powers that be, at least here in El Paso, and the economic powers that be in everywhere as Mexicans, is to push us out, right? Like when the factories left because of NAFTA, NAFTA was one of the most devastating things that has happened to our people. And they would say, follow the factories because you're a factory worker, right? And so they want to impose an identity that says that we, as women, we're an infinite source of disposable, cheap labor, right? Según ellos, that's our identity. But what is our identity? And that identity comes from these relationships and the sense of place for us. And so, our relationship with the earth, our relationship with each other, and that ¿cómo se dice? That collective work allows us to do that. So, and that comes up with that creativity. So when, for example, in our organization or in our community where we work with, that we call the chamizal, there might be recycling facilities, or they want to close our schools, and then they want to bring in all the contamination because we're right on the border with Ciudad Juarez. And so, we organize against those things, but we also have a celebration of the knowledge within the community, right? Because in order to build a community that we would like to see, we have the information in our community to build that, right? So a lot of it is constantly going out to talk to people. A lot of things that we do to bring in that joy is also, or that sharing, because I think the fact did to us is that they erased our knowledge, right? And the Mexican schools, as they were called here, they erased as if our knowledge is not important. And so if we were like the factory workers, if we would just ask, what do you know? They would get asked, ¿qué sabes? Pues no fui a la escuela. I didn't go to school. I don't know anything. But when when all together we talk about cooking, growing food, our little plants, then all of a sudden there's like this overflow of information and sharing of the knowledge amongst ourselves. And so how do we do this? That they're destroying the environment, all the factories that we're surrounded by and all of these things. And then the women in their resistance are planting, making our community green, right? And so like those everyday battles or those everyday efforts are important to recognize, not only from us as an organization, but the community, how they see themselves. So as the compañera was saying, we always tend to have festivals out in the community. We're always celebrating something, but it's the women within the community that are sharing the knowledge. There's no chef coming from the outside to give us a class about cooking or about planting or anything. It's all the sharing, the music, the teatro, the painting, the history, the documenting of the history. For us, the documentation of the history is extremely important because that's your source of information to give you a better view on how to struggle right now, right? And where we're gonna go towards the future. So there we do a lot of like, as much as we can, the archiving and the saving of some of the information, whether it's the history of the Mexican schools or things like that. And just real quick, the defense of space, of the taking over of certain space is important because that allows us to protect a little bit in order to give us space to think and plan and be creative and implement as women. So this country may say you have freedom of speech, but do we really as women have a right to think, plan, and implement our idea of a better future, of a present? That's when the answer many times is no. And so when we do for the outside world, as I call it, because I like to pretend that sometimes I can isolate myself from that, but they want to, what we call social enterprises. So like our daycare center or our restaurant or our trading company and things like that. So the restaurant, it could be a business, but it's also a place for us to ask questions. How do we change our relationship with our children? As adults, what do we have to shift in the way that we are? And what space do we want to create for our children so that they understand that they're part of nature, so that they have a good base, things like that. Or in the restaurant, well, what are we going to serve? Is it going to be Mexican? What kind of Mexican? Is it our ancestral food? Is our traditional food from the border? Like there's more questions. It's a constant questioning of things and trying to pay the bills, right? But maybe we could talk about that a little later. But it's also, how do we protect space, whether it's in the community out in the barrio when we take over parks or someone's house or things like that, but also our economic spaces. Our economic spaces and our buildings are also part of defending space so that we can think and plan and implement within the system that we are in, right? How are we creative? Like we cannot let them take away our creativity. And that's and our right to implement it, which is that's the battle, right?
Gracias, Lorena.
Try to make it quick.
Great. And I hope folks are starting to see the thread lines and the pattern and connecting the dots between what Iris was saying and what Lorena is saying. There's clear connections here. So we're going to go to Guillermo next and just refinar un poquito, adelantar la pregunta. So you have been rooted in the Southwest in Texas for many, many years. And so just kind of getting a little bit more specific here, what do you see the role, what is the role been that the Southwest has played as a region, and what role do you see it playing in the future? So it's just a little, es la pregunta que les hice a las compañeras, pero con usted un poquito más hablando de la perspectiva del Southwest, de Texas, pues también, si you just want to make it about Texas.
Bueno, pues no nomás Texas, ha trabajado un poco en otras partes. Pues yo creo it's because I grew up in West Texas, in a barrio, and we had to go to Mexican school, and that didn't change until Texas passed a law that we could join the white school. So a lot of my upbringing till I was 7 years old was in a barrio, Mexicano barrio, that mostly of my primo sharecroppers, cotton pickers, etc. But it was a very safe community. And I think that influenced me a lot, although I didn't understand the value of actually belonging to a community until I went through a lot of education. West Texas was very primitive, very savage, very Trump-like where I grew up. I worked mostly in the oil fields, but I did manage to get out of my rural area and go to the university and get a degree, spent a couple of years on the Navajo reservation, and they taught me a lot. about community, about the relationship to nature. But most of the work I did on the reservation was around health. So I was able to get a scholarship to go to the School of Public Health in North Carolina. And they had a really good school at that point in time. It was all about, we covered all the organizers in the US and Puerto Rico and others. So that school was dedicated mostly around community organization, although it was supposed to be a public health, but public health has a lot. If you're not organized, you can't really implement public health or any kind of prevention. But in the, so I went to the worst area, and after that, I went to the worst area in Texas, which was Lower Grand Valley. It had all the old world diseases. And then from there, I did work in several cities on the border, mostly on the border. There's been a lot of, Raza Unida started, like our part in Texas, started as a poor people's movement. It was way back there, we didn't have any rights at all. And that propelled some groups, especially like in Crystal City, Texas, where Raza Unida really took over the town, took over the county, took over the school system. It's the only place in Texas where they really took over all the institutions, and they really began developing a program. But the one thing they didn't consider is that the government would surround them to the point that they even cut their lights off, cut their gas off and everything to the entire community. So if you want to read about a community that actually made it, and then what happened to them after, white folks, they did not want that kind of a community to exist. I think from Raza Unida I came to the Southwest. It was a little bit different. I did a lot of work in El Paso with health and the migrant farm workers and the factory workers. And I think one of the things that I also did a little bit of work, I was invited to go to Phoenix a couple of times to protest against Arballo. That was very interesting. And then I also worked in New Mexico some, way back there. I met Betita. I was Las Vegas and in Albuquerque. So I've had that experience in the Southwest. And I can tell you at that point in time, there was a lot more unity. And I chalk it all off to that we had gasoline that was 25 cents a gallon. And La Raza was able to move from the lower Rio Grande Valley to San Antonio, we even went as far as LA, and to the different movements. And I don't think there is that kind of connection anymore, not with people who are interested in real change. I think that's one of the differences I see, that most of the organizations or the older organizations have kind of closed off and are working in their own areas, doing good work. But I think that's very interesting. But I've been involved for quite a long time, and one of the things that I think we don't consider is the assimilation process. There's the great wheel of assimilation that's going on. You don't notice it as much unless you live right on the border. When you see people from Juarez coming over and they get us, and our mayor, well, he's not mayor anymore. He was last year. He said, well, the problem we have in El Paso is that we're not assimilating the people or the workers or the children fast enough. So what he's talking about assimilation to this consumer US culture, right? And I think that's a very important point to consider, because I worked in several communities. I worked in the Lower East Side in New York, with the Chinese staff workers, and they have a very good organization. But I think that the dominance in the US very difficult to develop organizing, because in order to develop organizing, you have to be able to practice. And the one thing that the system in the US does not allow you to do is to practice for a long time. Because if you develop a certain direction, there's always kind of like, you always run into these barriers or alarms. You know, somebody will get upset with you and they'll send the FBI, or they'll send somebody to investigate you. So I think you have to kind of understand your community and who's in it. Like, so the whole question of practice, if you're able to develop an organization and it can develop a practice, it's difficult to do. Because it depends on if you have some economy and you have some organizing, you have some political experience, and then what about your ideology? That's supposed to kind of help you stick together. Some of the Brazilians that I run into that work with the early Workers' Party in Brazil, when they came to the US, they were kind of like amazed. They said, how can the unions have the same ideology as the workers? You know, so that's difficult. It's kind of hard. I said, well, why? To why? I said, well, they said, the unions have organization, right? And they have money, but the same ideology as sometimes as the bosses. They all have 3 cars, they have 2 TVs, and they all participate in the consumer culture. So I think it's important to understand the community you're working in and understand how things are, work.
I'm gonna see if I wanted to then, so the piece around like the way you're talking about, the unity that existed regionally is not as strong. The push or what the assimilation process looks like. I'm curious, when we move our gaze to La Isla in Puerto Rico, and also the diasporic, the diaspora and what movement has looked like, Puerto Rican, the organization and the contributions of Puerto Rican people to movement in the US is without question one of the most important. We're talking overall, and definitely within Latinx community. So, there's the Southwest as a region, and then we look at La Isla and the diaspora. So, directing a question to you, Iris, what is your view of, the current situation and where organizing is at this time? And I'm curious, like, if this piece around, like, there was different unity before, it was estaba más unido, the role of assimilation. Obviously, migration is algo diferente ahora, quizás no. Just curious what your take is on the question of the island and organizing across the diaspora.
Sorry. Tenemos como 10 preguntas en esa una que me hace Marisa.
Perdón.
No, primeramente yo creo que one of the elephant in the room when we talk Latinx is, and creating mi gente is, what is Latinx? It's the question of like Latino or came to be as a term to create a unity, right? And then it was co-opted. But it was based at a time on a real unity that Guillermo talks about. We travel from one place. I went to California. I met the Brown Berets in Los Angeles, and we had people come from Reyes Tirijina, the East Harlem Gut Theater when I was there. So there was, and we understood. We say, okay, soy, maybe people would say Hispano or Latino, pero soy Mexicano, soy puertorriqueña, soy colombiana. So I think that's one of the questions that you'll have to grapple with, right? Before we get to the question of Puerto Rico and the diaspora and all of that, right? And then to that, I add this question of which Guillermo raises, which is a question of ideology in the sense of our connection to Latin America, right? And our connection to our communities as workers. And we need to make a response to this thing that Biden and Harris are going to Central America and saying we have to throw money there so that the people won't come, so that the people from Latin America won't come, right? Because in my experience, entre los Latinos, when we were organizing back any organization de puertorriqueños, siempre había otros Latinos aquí. We were concentrated here. But if you go to the Southwest, then it would be Chicano, Mexicano organization. And if you're Puerto Rican, that's where you're going to go. So that unity is not there, and it's not there in the same way as I was mentioning earlier with the African-American community. Now, in terms of the diaspora, that's a whole can of worms, okay? The question that you ask is like a three-part question, because you're asking about mi gente, but we're also talking about the relationship of Puerto Rican activists to the liberation struggle in Puerto Rico. And that question we have been debating for 50 years, and that question will not be resolved until the colonial status of Puerto Rico is resolved. So we have to be very careful because, I was in an organization for 5 years and we took a wrong turn and made wrong decisions on that question. You cannot go to Puerto Rico and tell the Puerto Rican people how to carry out their liberation struggle. The people of Puerto Rico will decide. Our role here, whether we're Puerto Rican or Latinx or African American, and Puerto Ricans have a higher responsibility because we have a great stake in this. Our responsibility is to support what the activists and revolutionaries in Puerto Rico think they need from us, not for us to dictate to them what they need. That was the mistake that the Young Lords made. Now, then there's the question of what we do in terms of the Puerto Rican diaspora in the United States. And it has often been easier for the Puerto Ricans in the United States to get involved in Vieques and Promesa than to organize the Puerto Ricanos in this country. That becomes a burning issue for us now because the Puerto Rican population is humongous. Y hay más puertorriqueños acá en los Estados Unidos que en Puerto Rico. So tenemos que organizar el puertorriqueño acá. Now that hosts a whole host of challenges. It's a whole other conversation that we may want to have at another point in time. But the point that I wanted to make is that not to make the mistake of thinking that because we want to support and we need to support for Puerto Ricans, we're never going to be free in any way, shape, or form until that issue is resolved. And the younger generation today, by the way, this is another book that I did. Voces de Puerto Rico. And what I did, because at that point in time, after María, había mucha conversación en este país de, o Puerto Rico quiere esto, esto es lo que Puerto Rico necesita. And I felt, no, let's hear what the people of Puerto Rico are saying. And so I went. I was so amazed and impressed and humbled. I cried. I can't tell you how often I cried when I went places. Y yo soy nacida y criada en los Estados Unidos, pero soy 100% puertorriqueña. Y cuando fui allá y conocí a las personas que estaban trabajando en las comunidades, creando comedores, como dice Lorena, el gobierno no estaba presente. El pueblo tuvo que unirse. So those are the voices in this book. I documented those voices because I felt that there was a certain kind of imperial sense that was developing among Puerto Ricans for the right reasons, but taking a wrong turn like we had done. So organizing Puerto Ricans is going to be very important for mi gente, I think, because the population is growing. But it's going to pose a lot of challenges because the community is different than than the people that came post-migration. You have a greater diversity. But, in one of your sessions, there was a conversation about electoral politics and this being an arena, one of the tools in our toolkit for the present moment. And there's a lot of Puerto Ricans in Florida. It's more than in New York now. So I know that you already have work there, so there might be.
Yes.
So that's all I want to say about that, unless you have some follow-up questions.
Well, I'm going to see if actually folks here listening in have any questions or follow-up on this. So I'll open it up, but just on that quick point, Iris, I think that's been definitely our orientation of how we relate to the island, and shouting out aquí Vladimir, who is on the island, que vive en Puerto Rico and is part of our leadership circle. Por si acaso, si quieres decir algo, Vladi. Dice que está aquí aplaudiendo a Iris. But yeah, I think that's been the approach, and then there's the recent migration and just like the absolute like growth of the community in Florida, but also like in places like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. O sea, podemos hablar de y pues por donde quiera, ¿verdad? All over. So let me open it up to see if anybody aquí en el Zoom tiene una pregunta, un comentario para Lorena, para Iris o Guillermo.
Yo quería preguntarle a Lorena, estabas hablando mucho de lo que se han construido y cómo están resistiendo lo de afuera, trying to build creatively. What are some of the things that you've seen? And you've been there helping to lead that process for over 20 years now. And what I'm wondering if you've noticed a difference in like this, how that struggle has changed over time, both within our own communities and then past, and obviously Guillermo, pues, con más tiempo, being present in that, but also like, what are some of the most significant things that are needed for that continue to grow and flourish? So like both the change, if you've seen any in our communities, and also the process, the fight that's coming at you, but also what are the things that are most needed to help that look in what you all are building, flourish and grow and even expand more so?
Because I think for us, it's the same thing against us in different ways, right? So for example, we were organizing the garment workers and our community was full of garment factories and garment workers. And then the system decides it doesn't want you anymore, right? So it pushes you out. In our community, they have no need for women in our community anymore. So it's another push us to get us out. So it looks different, but it's the same forces, the economic forces that in the powers that be that continue to push us out. I think that, and when I forget what the other question was, but so for us, I think the most important thing that is needed is to have more space to continue to go out to the community and involve the women and the families in our neighborhood and the different generations, right? And several generations, and have that organizing include all of our families. And to us that is kind of what brings life, and it's what's the most critical part of sustaining our organization at the time. And there's very little resources to do that, right? Like if you get a grant, for example, it says we want you to do 1, 2, 3, and what we need is time to organize and talk to people and get the ideology and get our own ideas out there. And that's the hidden work. It's the building of the relationships, the hidden work that there's no resources for necessarily, and what we're always being creative and building those spaces that allow us to do that long-term permanent work, ¿verdad? What is actually going to build community, that is not so romantic or exciting to the outside world, ¿verdad? Porque está escondido. So to us that is like the critical point of the resources that we need. And then also we continue to, like Guillermo was saying, or others were saying, we're building in one area, the inspector shows up, or someone wants to check your things, or you get attacked from the city, or we're just like, no te dejan trabajar, no te dejan trabajar en paz, right? That's always the struggle. So I think that for us, it's like I said, it's the same attack, but it looks different, right? Of destroying the whatever social fabric that we can create. It's a constant attack on it to dismantle that, to spread us out, right? So that we can't build community and we can't share that knowledge and create it. And also, just one last thing that is important for us to do, as the compañera was also saying, is that we have different ways of participation, right? Whether it's with the babies in the daycare, or planting food, or sharing your food, or protesting, or the workshops, or there's just different ways of a community. There's a different way that the community has life, right? And in different ways. So how do we also encourage that? So you, in whatever way que puedes aportar, haya espacio y oportunidad para que aportes y compartas tu conocimiento. Yeah, and hopefully in that way we can start to heal that social fabric that to us is the most important thing, and pues siempre la música, el arte y todo también te ayuda con las ideas and to bring us all together. So I don't know if I answered your question, but to me it's the same monster coming after us all the time. No nos deja.
Gracias. Other folks, si
Rafa.
tienen un comentario.
I just want to add something. This is Guillermo. I think in terms of the Southwest, the last big push that a lot of young people and others were involved in was the National Commission for Democracy in Mexico. I don't think there's been that much of a unity, because it went all the way from Houston, San Antonio, all the small towns, all the way to Albuquerque and north somewhat, and all the way to LA, and also encompassed groups in Sacramento. So there was a lot of that kind of connection, that kind of that there were a lot of young people involved, and that was just in the Southwest. There were other groups involved, but I think that was something that we could look at also. What spurred all there was more than 100 universities at one point in time participating in the National Commission to try to help with the whole situation in Chiapas at one time. I think that was very important and inspirational to a lot of young people. But that kind of dissipated after a point. whereas the Zapatistas are getting more help from Europe and from other countries than from the U.S. So, it's a question of how we also support other groups in Latin America, because NAFTA and some of the plans by the Mexican president are really to destroy communities instead of build communities to a certain extent. And I think we're really feeling that migration from those countries that the U.S. helped create. NAFTA was the greatest migration causing event, because all the campesinos could no longer afford subsistent living in Mexico, and they had to come north. So I think it's important to look at that situation also.
Pues nomás para agregar un poquito lo de Guillermo, es que pues es que también los compas, el reto siempre es, ¿y tú qué? ¿Cómo vas a organizar en tu comunidad? ¿Verdad? ¿Qué vas a hacer para organizarlos en la comunidad donde te encuentras? ¿Qué alternativas van a crear? Ese siempre ha sido el reto. Y pues está difícil entrarle a ese.
Gracias. Do other folks want to jump in with questions or comments?
I have a question, and apparently Kamati does too.
Hi, Kimati.
Hi. Come say hi. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Y tengo una pregunta. The question is, you talked earlier about the importance and also how we're like doing away with time with political education. And as someone who has used multiple mediums, right? In person, a documentary, books, looking today at the role of social media, I mentioned this in the chat, but it's like, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's giving access to a bunch of people who didn't necessarily have it before, but on the other hand, it's not the right information, and it can be overwhelming, and people actually aren't engaging fully with things in ways in which we have to like study and read. So I'm curious, what do you think is the best form of political education nowadays, and what are the ways in which we can do that?
You have to start where people are at. And we used everything. We used personal testimonials that people needed to make, come to a group. Maybe we had a poet come in. Maybe we used it wasn't just all book learning. It was a film. Maybe somebody took a trip to Cuba and brought back pictures. So you start where the people are at and you use all the tools, because, I think that academia has influenced a lot to think that education is one thing. We all educate each other, which is what, la compañera dice, Guillermo dice, we've been around for a while. We know that we get our source of knowledge from each other first and foremost. So that's what I would say. And with the social media, I know there's a lot of talk and cancel and this and that, and I don't understand what half of that means, to tell you the truth. But you've got to go your own path. There's always going to be people throwing bricks at you. If you're in a struggle, that's part of the game. From the FBI to your own community, the FBI is going to come knocking. And you can't be fighting a system and think that they're going to say, oh, okay, fight me. They're going to fight tooth and nail. So that is also part of the understanding, and we have to figure out how to protect each other. But political education use everything. La doña que puede venir a hablar de what's happening in Puerto Rico, que acaba de llegar de Puerto Rico y nos puede informar, right? And we had certain points. We were following a 13-point program, so we wanted to make sure we covered socialism, 50 years ago, talking about the liberation of women, and a lot of the brothers didn't want to hear it, or we want to talk about opposing racism, or make sure you cover all the topics. I did want to add something that seems like a common thread with the Southwest and lo que Lorena dice y lo que estamos hablando de Puerto Rico is the issue of displacement. Our communities are being displaced. When you say, you know, they want to push us out, and we're being pushed out. We're being pushed out in the ghettos of New York City. We are being pushed out in Puerto Rico. Migration is another word for displacement. So that's another unifier among Latinx people, is that we understand displacement, separation of families. And because we're so diverse in terms of Latinx, we're talking about small rural communities and then big metropolis and, you know, colonial possessions, that, you know, we need some things to be in common, in addition to that we need to recognize the particularities.
Ooh. What's your-
I think about mass
the guest
media,
here.
you know, I think it's very important, you know, what, at least along the border, I was totally surprised that in McAllen, Texas, they elected a Republican mayor. So the valley, I mean, the border, several towns along the border went Republican this last go round. In El Paso, it was really tremendous to see 160,000 votes for Trump. So I don't know what, you know, as Chicanos, as Mexican Americans, I don't think we have a real message for our people, at least in the Southwest. You know, we're not talking, we're trying to deal with how they're discriminating against our school children. You know, this is like 1973 in El Paso, when Chicanos were barely trying to get into the universities. But as I grew in the Southwest, we don't have a message. So there've been, you know, our communities are full of Trump people. That's what happened to our school district. We had a school district, the biggest one affecting our barrios. They were all Trump's people. So they closed all the barrio schools. So I don't know what is the message as a group of organizations we could do in terms of the Southwest to kind of say, hey, pues, we're still here. There's a lot of emphasis on, and which most of us agree with, in helping the migrant children. But some of our families are wondering, well, what happened to us? You know, what's happened to the trauma of our children, you know, after COVID, when the virtual education didn't work. But I think it's a very interesting thing to look at the Southwest and who's going to give a strong message. I think it has to be different from the past.
Están en el cuarto. Disculpe, aquí me llegó mi guest sleeper que se acaba de despertar. Anyone have a last question? I have the last question on the questions we sent to folks, but I just want to see if anybody on the call has any last questions for Guillermo, Iris, or Lorena. Okay. There's so much more here and we could talk about. I apologize for the multi-part questions. I just want to point out to folks, you know, this piece that Guillermo's touching on around some of the real rising threats. I think we can speak to, we've talked a little bit about Mexicano, Chicano communities in the Southwest. We're talking about Boricuas in the diaspora, but also recognizing there are more Puerto Ricans that live in Florida now than in New York, which is kind of like, you know, whoa. But also these places in the United States.
More Boricuas.
No,
in the United States.
Que en la isla, pero yo estaba pensando que dijiste que en Florida en comparación con Nueva York también.
Perdona, sí,
Ya.
sí.
Y viendo que these two places were places where, you know, the GOP and Trump really, you know, had a very big impact in increase of support. I think there was a report that I think was 38% Latino vote went for Trump. And these places and these communities we're talking about are some of the folks who actually came out. And that's not going to change, or it's not going to go away. It's actually more important to recognize and organize around that in between election cycles. So raising that, the lack of a whether it's a regional or a message that's specific to folks, you know, whether it's nationality, whether it's geography, and then what that means towards a broader common message, naming that. I also just want to lift up the things that folks talked about in terms of the documentation and the combating of the erasure, contesting the idea of what knowledge is and who has that knowledge, and how we create culture and the role that culture has. There's just so much here, and I think we didn't get into, but I just want to point out to folks the Cine el Estado, the stuff that the work that is outside of policy fights, that it's outside of the legal system, por decir, outside of the elections, it's actually autonomous work. I think there are real examples that folks have to this body of work. And I think we could have a conversation just on that, both about why it's important, but also the real deal. What does it take to sustain that? And what are the different, once you get something up and running, what are the different paths you could take? And I just want to, like, you know, shout out La Mujer Obrera for your all sustaining of this autonomous infrastructure that belongs to the community, is run by the community. And I shouted out Iris's press. That is another example, right, of that type of autonomous infrastructure that we need. So just in, you know, just I think there's a lot here. I just want to say before we close out, it's been too long since I can speak for myself, since I've seen or spoken to all of you, and would really love to have a conversation with each of you about cómo se puede ver un acercamiento, un apoyo para lo que están haciendo ustedes en su trabajo, in your endeavors and the things you're passionate about. How can mi gente be a support to what you're doing, and how we can continue to work with you, learn from you, and walk alongside you. So that's something I would be, you know, remiss to say, in much respect. Last question for you all, like, just name, it could be a little awkward because you're like, I don't know exactly what y'all are doing. So, you know, understanding that. But one of the questions we've asked everybody that's come and had these conversations with us is, what do you think mi gente's best contribution is right now? What should mi gente be focusing on? What should an organization like mi gente be doing? And whoever wants to start, and we'll go from there.
I'll start. One of the things out of everything that we've talked about is, I think that we need mi gente to project a loud voice for Latinx and for some of our issues, because the conversation is very black and white still. And so I think that's a spot where you can make a contribution. Admittedly, that's a tough one because of everything that we've talked about, the regional, the differences, et cetera, et cetera. But there are certainly issues, work that you're doing that you can lift up and that we need to hear those voices. We need to hear those voices, your voices. There's many other things, but I'll go with that one.
Well, I'm not sure what to say about that, but I know that I I would I am concerned that all these different terms that are umbrella terms erase the struggle of our people, ¿verdad? De los salvadoreños, de los guatemaltecos, de los mexicanos. We have a very specific history here in the Southwest, ¿verdad? Or in Texas, a brutal history también against our people. And I feel sometimes when maybe with mi gente could, as it was being suggested, obviously as y'all are trying to do, my assumption is to bring us together, but also lifting up the struggles of all of our people, para que no se borre cuando dicen, you know, primero Latinx y luego BIPOC, and I'm always asking, does that include Mexicans? Do you know what I mean? Is that us over here? Y porque, well, you know, like todos nuestros pueblos tienen una historia de lucha fuerte, desde nuestros países de origen y en este país. And, y si permitimos that if we allow for it to be ¿cómo se dice? Diluido, then we can learn from those struggles, right? We can learn from that resistance. So, I don't know.
Maybe that's the contribution we make.
I think it's very important for, you know, I think I was mentioning for Chicano Mexicanos, you know, to have a strong message in the Southwest. I don't know how exactly we do that. I think helping the different organizations that have survived is one thing. You know, you don't see the like youth or, you know, Chicano youth really involved in some of the projects, but you know, we have some participation certainly here, but I don't see it in terms of the Southwest. You know, we haven't arrived at what should we do in the Southwest to have a more focused message and to also support the organizations. I don't know if it's supporting young people to go to the different organizations or to the different areas. I think it's something to talk about, but I think it's very important because I think we're losing. It's like our message, we no longer have, even if we have a large number of what the Hispanic people in power now, but the message of low-income people is just not coming through. So I think there's a need for a new push to try to identify some of the major problems that are still with us, especially on the border. It's not just the immigrant children that are coming over, which is a serious problem. But there's a lot of other problems along the border. I think that's one thing that gente should explore, how to develop a message. I think it's very hard to do all the differences we've had in the past, but I think it's possible.
Thank you all so much for that gift. With that, I think that's the questions I have. I don't know if anybody on the leadership circle feels up for just a quick appreciation for our compas that have joined us here today. Rafa, you want to do it?
Sure. I was gonna, you know, I just again want to thank Edie's, Lorena, Guillermo for being on here, for all the work you do every single day. Many times it's thankless work. It's work that's invisibilized, but it's work that is it's what allows our communities to still be here as our communities, not as just mano de obra, and not just as tools for capital or whatever else they have. And so I just can't thank you enough for what you do every single day. And even though you all are busy, you're here talking to us, and just know that, you know, we will take your words and lessons and thoughts and hopefully build and will build something constructive to not only continue the work you all do, but hopefully nourish and help further it along as well. And I'm excited about those partnerships and to see how they grow moving forward. And just thankful for everything.
Ale, thank you all so much. Appreciate your time.
Por la invitación.
No, gracias por su tiempo.
No, gracias a ustedes, que ustedes son nuestro futuro.
Están hablando Gael y Kat.
Dale, muchísimas gracias. I will reach back out to you all, Guillermo, Lorena, and Iris. We will need your address, and I'll be reaching out to y'all to just follow up on this conversation. And one thing I'll just tell you antemano, we're asking everyone if there's a reading or some kind of educational material that you would share that you think is important for folks to read. I'll follow up with you about it, pero les aviso antemano that I'll be circling back with that question. Thank you everyone for your time. Thank you, Iris, Guillermo, and Lorena. This is the fourth and final session. The babies are appearing. Everyone's saying bye.
I love it. I love it. Gracias.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Buenas noches.
Gracias, Lorena, Guillermo, y todos, todas.
Hasta
Un
luego.
abrazo.
Gracias.
Un abrazo.
Abrazo.
Bye. Bye, guys.